Hello, and welcome to Tea with Jess. I'm author Jess Montgomery, and I'm delighted you're joining me for a little tea break. As Nana says in my kinship mystery series, Life is Hard, Have Tea. Today, my mug, you can't tell because it's all worn off, but it's a mug that I got years ago at Yellowstone National Park. So that's my tea with Jess mug for this Monday. Loved it there. Would go back anytime. Such a gorgeous park. But today I'm welcoming Erin Flanagan, who is not only an outstanding writer, but she's also a good friend of mine. And Erin is the author of two short story collections, The Usual Mistakes and It's Not Going to Kill You, which contain literary gems that capture the essence of the human heart. Her debut novel, though, is what we're here to talk about today, and that's Deer Season. And it's likewise a literary gem that delves into the human condition, particularly in small town Nebraska at the start of deer season, where a developmentally disabled man becomes the center of attention in a crime that he may or may not be involved in. You have to read the novel to find out. um, She's also the author of the thriller Blackout, which will come out in fall of 2022 with Thomas and Mercer. And she's held fellowships to many prestigious writing colonies and conferences, reviews books for Publishers Weekly, and is an English professor at Wright State University, my alma mater, go Raiders, and focusing on creative writing. So I'm delighted to welcome Erin to Tea with Jess. Hello,
Hello.
Erin. How are
Hi.
you?
I'm good. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So, first, of course, I want to ask you to give us a quick synopsis of deer season, but with no spoilers.
Sure. So it opens on opening weekend of hunting season in a small town in Nebraska in the 1980s. And Hal Bullard, who you mentioned, is a mentally challenged farmhand who goes hunting for the first time, comes back at the end of the weekend with some blood in his truck and a mysterious dent near the headlight. And the same weekend, Peggy Ahern, a teenage girl from the town, goes missing. And as things begin to heat up, people begin to see each other in new lights and start having to make decisions about what they'll do to protect those people that they think may or may not have done something wrong. So that's kind of the
Mm.
synopsis.
That's that's a thrilling premise, and I
Ooh.
know it plays out well because and fulfills the promise of a thrilling story, and also looking into the human heart because I've read the novel.
You have.
So I have, and it's a wonderful novel.
Thank
So
you.
congratulations.
Thanks.
Um, so I wanted to ask you about this. You successfully um, and realistically explore small town life, but you don't pander and you don't
Mm,
engage in stereotypes.
thank you.
And too often, I think that novels either set in rural areas or in small towns either idolize, like it's cute and it's so back to earth, or they parody
Hmm.
small town life or rural life. So, how did you avoid those pitfalls, and why is it important to you as a writer and as a human in general
Hmm.
to have a realistic small town slash rural setting?
Well, I grew up in a town very similar to Gunther, Nebraska. It was called Sanborn, Iowa, one state over. And those people there were as complicated as they are anywhere else in the world. And I think that there was some people, I think, get fooled by the Midwestern veneer of niceness or stoicism and
Mhm.
don't give people credit for being as complicated as they are. They've also grown up, a lot of people in the Midwest, with this keep yourself to yourself. So they don't act out a lot of drama, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And so I really wanted to explore a town that was similar to the one I grew up in, with both that capturing what it was like for me in the 80s, but also looking
Mhm.
back as an adult, understanding it much more differently than I did at the time. So that was, I think, where a lot of that came from. And to hear someone say, "Oh, you didn't pander," I can't tell you what that means to me, because like you, I see a lot of those portrayals and they just bum me out. Like, I don't think people realize the complexity that's there. So what if my ex-father-in-law now, but I remember one time, like, dropped a cement block on his foot, and later when somebody asked him, "Oh, that must have really hurt," and he said, "Didn't tickle." And I thought that was so, like, the Midwestern way of handling that, like the humor, but also like, yeah, I'm not going to get into how bad that was, but
yeah, that is perfect. It didn't tickle. Love that. That is a great anecdote, and it does capture. I mean,
very Midwestern,
yeah. I mean, we both grew up in the Midwest. We live in the Midwest, different areas than what you're talking about. But yeah, there is that stoicism. But it is a veneer for complicated souls. We're all complex and complicated souls. Have you heard from people in the town where you grew up or family about your exploration of small town rural life?
I have from quite a few people, like, in small towns, not necessarily from Sanborn, who have said that they've appreciated that kind of view of small towns. And I definitely had my parents read the book before it was published, because some of the story is based, like, the good parts of the story are based somewhat on my parents' journey to live and to move to Iowa. And so I was like, I just want you to understand, I don't think all the bad things are about you guys, some of the more complicated stuff. But so I wanted to be sure that they felt like it was, an accurate portrayal of small towns, because they're the people who are going to hear. Like, since I was a kid living in Sanborn, if I stepped out of turn, my mom, Judy, was the one who got the call, not me. So I was like, for your own sake, I hope I've done justice.
Yeah, because you're going to get those text messages or phone calls or, like, is everything okay? Does it tickle? I don't know. So you mentioned 1985, and I'm intrigued that you set the novel in 85, and it works really well for your story. But I have a few questions about that. So one is, what drew you to the time frame? And it sounds like maybe some of your own memories. And do you consider 1985 historical? And were there challenges or benefits to writing a book set in 1985 versus writing a book set in the 2020s? And by the way, when I was thinking about this question, I thought, well, 1985 isn't that long ago. And then I did the math and went, it's 40 years.
I can't do the math.
I hate to tell you.
Yeah. So 1985 was about the middle. I would have been about Milo's age, who's one of the main characters in the book. That's Peggy Ahern's little brother in 1985. And part of the reason I wanted to set it in the 80s was because one of the things that was so crucial to me about growing up in a small town was that there wasn't this constant sense of the outside world. And part of it was I was, pretty sheltered. Part of it was that, my folks would watch the evening news, but I was like 13 then. I was like, I'm not watching the news. I'm waiting until Three's Company comes on. So I was like not that engaged in it. And I didn't really read the paper. And you could escape like this larger sense of the world. And so I felt really safe there. And I'm sure not everybody in town did, but I did. And I think that I'm not sure if that feeling, that kind of sense of safety is really available anymore. Like, I have a 13-year-old now, and she's very aware of the world we live in, and we try to talk about it and process it. But, I don't remember that as a kid. I also have a terrible memory, so that might be part of it too. But I just don't think that sense of safety, of that sense of like such a small world really would be possible now. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to set it then. As for why 1985 versus 1986, there was a reason early on having to do with mental disability laws, but I can't remember even now what it was. It was one of the things that like early on in research I found and thought, oh, that's important. And then it never really crossed my
path. And then it wasn't.
Yes, like research.
Yes, like so much research. Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying about it. I don't know. I don't think the world's gotten more dangerous necessarily. I think we're just more aware.
Yes.
I mean, I grew up in this, came of age in the 70s, but even before that, as a little girl, like my parents moved from one tract neighborhood to a different neighborhood, tri-levels, the McMansions of the era.
Yes.
Moved to a tri-level, but our house was, our tri-level was the third one built on this one street in this whole development. So the cornfield and the, forest that had been around somebody's farmhouse had all been ripped out and the streets had been like laid in. But there were just 3 houses. And so all the other houses were under construction. And I several times I would watch, I would just wander around because kids did. You'd get on your bike and you'd wander around. And I watched at this one house where when the workers were going to take a break because they were doing electrical work, and I wanted their wire. This is admitting my thieving young self. I'm like, ooh, I could weave that into some really awesome rings and anklets and bracelets. And so I went and I stole their electrical wire. But I was like 8 or 9, so I didn't get that I was stealing. What I got was that there's green and there's purple and there's pink. And I'm braiding this together. And the only bad thing that happened was that one of the workers came to our house and said, ma'am, you got to, tell your kid that please don't take our electrical wire. And that's all that happened. But I look back at that and I'm like, oh, now I'm kind of horrified, but not at my parents for letting me wander, because everybody let their kid wander. But
no, I used to ride my bike 7 miles into town.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But so I recognize too that, I was, growing up in a white, working to middle class, small town. And that also shaped my sense of safety in a way that, like, as a kid, I was like, doop, doop, doop. I thought everybody, had the same experience as me. And I realize now, like, oh, that's not the case, So I think that has something to do with it too. What's that?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, yeah, exactly. Not everyone has the same experience. Yeah.
So one of my other small town favorites was that, and I'm pretty sure that I'm remembering this correctly, but like people would be driving around drunk all the time, and like the cops would just kind of escort them home, in their car. Like they would let them drive the car home, and they would just make sure that they'd follow them in the police car. And I'm like, oh man, does that still go on in small towns? I think so. I would think so.
I don't know.
I don't know if I can write that. Like, I just don't know that experience in 2021.
Yeah. I don't think it would, that kind of thing wouldn't come over as realistic, I think.
Yeah.
Even if it is still happening, it wouldn't come over as realistic.
True.
So you mentioned research, and, we do research and we think it's really important in the moment, and then we let it, go away. What kind of research did you do for this novel?
I had to do a lot about like hunting licenses and how all that works, because I had no idea. And I'm trying to think what else. It was a lot more than that. I originally had, just in draft form, set it in Iowa, and it was too close to home. And so I wanted to move it to Nebraska, where I lived for a decade. So I wasn't just like, they're the same. Like, so I changed it for Nebraska. But like I had to do a lot of research then about like where to put it for the rural area and stuff. So a lot of stuff about the 80s. One of my big challenges was writing Hal, I wanted to be sensitive to his character as somebody who was mentally challenged. So I did hire a sensitivity reader to help me with that, and felt much better after I, had done that, and just wanted to be sure I was portraying him accurately and empathetically, in not just kind of falling to what I see in the media that might not be good portrayals. So those were a couple of things I researched. There was a lot of looking at trucks, if I remember correctly. I wanted the right kind of trucks.
So did you end up buying a truck, taking up hunting, and
No, but it's back there. You can't see it, I don't think. But right there is the ram's head that my dad had on his Dodge Ram pickup when I was growing up. It's not the same one, but it's the what's that called? The front of the car.
We're writers.
Oh,
we can't think of a word.
Also two middle-aged ladies trying to come up with a word, so God knows what it is.
It's hood ornament. Hood ornament.
Hood ornament, yes. And it looks like a ram. And when I was a kid, I used to Milo does this in the book, but I used to like to ram it with my head, and it would tilt back. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Like when I was finally tall enough, I could do that with my dad's truck. So that was like when my husband got me that for my birthday one year when I was still working on the book.
That's cool. That's very nice. So your novel also explores subtleties about relationships and some of the myths we create for ourselves about ourselves or about where we are in the world, if you want to put it that way, which is definitely a theme of your short fiction as well. I still think about the air guitar competition short story as one of the most funny yet touching and brilliant short stories I've ever read. So have you always been drawn to this theme, or did this kind of evolve for you over time as you wrote more and more?
I think it's an obsession that I come back to again and again and again, trying to figure out how people figure out who they are as people, and also figure out who they are in families, in relationships, and how those kind of all create different versions of the same person. And also, there's overlap between them, but I think that's really hard. And I think we do grow up with a lot of myths about ourselves or about people, and trying to figure out which one of those are true and which one of those are false is really difficult. I like to think that I'm a somewhat self-aware person. But
you are.
I am. Well, thank you. But I am also shocked sometimes by my own blind spots. So I'm constantly trying to figure that all out. And who are people? And then how do they interact with other people? It sounds kind of silly, I guess, but I've always I'm very interested in that. And I'm also really interested in good people who make bad decisions.
Yes.
I do think people are inherently good. I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but I've always, thought very positively about the human race, despite some people to the contrary. And so I'm constantly then, well, why do we do the things we do? So that's another thing that will explore till the end of time, I'm sure.
Well, and so much material within that theme.
Gosh, yeah. It's broad enough.
It is broad enough. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the cookie recipe, but when you start thinking about all the add-ins that you can switch out, it's a lot of different cookies. Yeah.
I just love cookies. I mean, who are we kidding?
Yeah. Cookies are good. So speaking of short fiction, again, so I love to read short stories. I find it a different challenge, though, and more difficult in some ways to write short fiction than novels. So you've done both successfully. What are some of the differences and challenges? And did writing in the short form kind of help you, or did you have to relearn or unlearn some things from short form to go to long form?
Oh boy. I had to learn a lot of new stuff. I was more hopeful than I maybe should have been that short stories would prepare me for a novel. And I think they did in that I was, looking at these little moments in characters' lives and really kind of figuring out how these were crucial little bombs that had gone off, and then writing about that. And I loved it. Like I like that still is like kind of a high to write short stories in a way that the novel isn't. But I don't know. It's the affair versus the, or the one night stand versus the marriage, and the marriage
Right.
is like, is satisfying in a different way. But so I feel like it helped me with scenes, it helped me with character. Writing short stories did, but two things that really oh man, it was such a struggle to figure out was pacing and structure. So there's three things: pacing and structure, and understanding the characters really deeply and letting the reader in on that. That was, I was like, I didn't see that one coming. But I think in short stories, so much is implied, and you're putting the character in the scene and really letting that speak for itself in a way that it doesn't necessarily in a novel. Like in a novel, they might act out in a scene, and that's interesting and like, oh, but then usually at some point there's going to be more reflection. They're going to be thinking about it later or telling a friend about it or something. And I never had to write that before. So like an editor went through and was like, can you let us in more? Can you let us in more here? Can you let us in more here? And then by the end of it, for the love of God, woman, can you let us in here? So like, that was really hard for me to be like so explicit about emotions. And I'm wondering like if part of that's the Midwestern in me. I'm like, well, I know they're feeling it. Why do they have to say it? So, but that was a huge learning curve for me.
Yeah, that interiority, versus spelling it out.
So that was tough. But I got there.
You did.
After many,
you did get
many
there,
attempts.
and you have another novel coming out next year.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah, I'm so excited about that one.
Okay. Well, we'll have you back on to talk about that one next year. So we met through a writing workshop, as you well know, and I've mentioned that you've been to many different conferences and you teach creative writing. So all of these are a form of community. The actual writing part of writing is a solitary effort, but how does community play a role for you in your broader calling as a writer?
Oh, I think it's become more and more important the longer I've been writing. I think like I kind of fell into a natural community when I went to college and then went on to grad school and stuff. And when I moved to Dayton, I think I floundered a little bit trying to find other writers. And once I did, it was, I don't know, it's like the Grinch, my heart grew 3 sizes. I felt like, just having people to talk to about the craft or talk to about the business side of it, it just opened everything up in a way that felt really, really crucial and really, really important. I just finished edits on an essay that's coming out in Catapult about writing book reviews, and how that also became like such a huge part of community for me, that I felt like I could fangirl over all these different writers and not feel the pressure as a writer myself. And how that also I just really loved that. But yeah, I think community is incredibly important. And I can't believe how many times writing or talking with other writers has helped me solve problems,
Yeah.
and just they'll let me blather on and talk. And then they look at me until I figure out the answer. And then a couple months later, I do the same for them. It's just really, it's really wonderful. It's amazing to me too, that there's no like sense of competition in that community that I'm in anyway, that I feel like it really is success for one, success for all. And we really do champion each other.
I think so. Yeah, that's been my, by and large, my experience as well. So, which is great. So for people who are interested in writing or doing other creative work, do you have a couple tips for getting started or for staying motivated?
Oh, motivation has never really got me anywhere, because I'm like, I just love Netflix and the couch so much. So for me, it
I
really
do
has
too.
been, oh, isn't it the worst? I'm like, and especially because TV is so
Ah,
good now. I just
I
want to
know.
binge everything. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I really, a big one on setting goals that are realistic and setting the time to reach the goals. So I have for, years now, kept a Google Doc with a good friend, and we both record what we're working on, and how long each day and what kind of progress we're making. And just even opening the doc and seeing that Charlotte's, hammering along on her projects is motivating for me to work on mine. So every Sunday, what I do is I look at the week ahead and I think, okay, I've got, doctor's appointment for my daughter. I got to take the dogs to the vet. I've got, my job and all this other stuff, having coffee with Jess. And so I think about like where I can fit in the time and then how much I can realistically accomplish. And I'm pretty good about just sticking with that. I don't write every day, but I usually write every week. And so if you can come up with some consistency and some goals, I think you can do about anything, really.
I think you're right. I think that's excellent advice.
I just
Yeah,
chip away.
consistency and yeah, chipping away at it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazing because you'll chip away, and you think I'm not really doing anything, and then suddenly you look back and you go, "Well, hot damn! look at
I
what
know,
all
it's
I just did."
shocking. It's shocking. So
Yeah.
I've kept track now on this Google Doc with Charlotte for so long. The last book, Blackout, that I finished is I could track every hour and see where I spent my hours. And I was surprised. I'm still working on edits. I'm at about 460 hours for that book right now, which does not seem like as many as I would have guessed, like for writing a
Yeah.
novel. If you think of like, oh, you do 10 hours a week or something, that's 46 weeks. That's not that serious. Somehow it was 2 years, but anyway. But that's really helped me. And also the other thing I realized was how little time I spend on first drafts because I'm all about the editing. I think that was like
Yes.
18% of the hours, and yet over half of the months because I dread it so much. But so I'm like, I think you
Yeah.
can learn a lot about your practice too by looking into that kind of stuff.
So just being observant of
Mm-hmm.
your own practice. And I do like the notion of checking in with another writer because
Mm-hmm.
or another creative, because that gives you some accountability, and you can encourage one another. So that's a good thing.
No, I
Anything
love
else you'd
that.
like to share about your writing, about your book? I've got your website is erinflanagan.net. So
Yes.
people can go to erinflanagan.net and find your book, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's on wherever you'd find books, Amazon, IndieBound, all of that as well. I'm trying to think. Just thank you, I guess, for having me. It was such a joy to be here. Oh, and we didn't talk about my mug.
Oh, well, let's talk about your mug.
So I've got
Describe
an
your
elf
mug.
mug, and it's
Oh,
so Will Ferrell delights me to no end. And this mug is huge. It's like the size of my head. Look at that. And I
that
think
is a
like I
gorgeous
just love
mug.
that, like with enough caffeine, I can be as
Yes.
excitable as Buddy the Elf. But I'm like Christmas spirit all year round. So
Christmas
this is
spirit
my
all year
regular mug,
round.
not just because it's fall.
Yeah,
But
you just use that. Well, and that enthusiasm. That's
oh, I know.
perfect.
Who doesn't want to be like all the time, like Buddy? Who doesn't want
Yeah,
a
I love
mainline
Buddy the
syrup?
Elf. Oh, Buddy the Elf. Oh, well, thank you for joining me on Tea with Jess, and
Oh,
thank
thank
you to
you.
everybody who's tuned in or who's watching the recording later or who is listening to this on the podcast, Tea with Jess. So until next tea break, everybody take care of yourself and your loved ones and have fun. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.